The Office of Personnel Management is out with new guidance on telework and remote work for federal employees. The updated policy now emphasizes as much in-person presence as possible across government. OPM's revisions aim to better align with the Trump administration's return to office orders. Here with more details is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Nice to be with you as always, Terry.
All right, we have more formal guidance. What does this new guidance say about in-person work expectations?
Well, there won't be a lot of surprises here for federal employees. Essentially, what the Office of Personnel Management is saying is that they should be fully on site, essentially as much as possible, with a few exemptions that we can get into later. But federal employees should generally be working full-time in person. And of course, this comes back to an executive order that President Trump issued on his first day in office, which told agencies to cancel all telework and remote work agreements and return employees to the office full time. That's, of course, been a point of contention and debate for many years, really starting with the COVID-19 pandemic and kind of the future of work as we came out of that. There was some back and forth, of course, during the Biden administration, but now we've seen this real push towards just fully on-site presence without a whole lot of exemptions there.
You did mention that there would be some exemptions or some exceptions. Where is telework or remote work still at least technically allowed?
There are exceptions for federal employees. For example, if you have a disability or if you are a military spouse, there's exemptions there. And it's really as long as that doesn't diminish the performance of the employees. So OPM in its new guidance talked about, the ability to telework or work remotely is okay as long as the employee is continuing to perform at the same level. But as we've seen in practice, there have been some employees who have said that they've actually been denied reasonable accommodation requests to telework, even if they do have a qualifying disability. So there are some concerns there about the implementation of that part of the policy. For example, at the Department of Health and Human Services, they launched during 2025 a stricter review process for approving those accommodations, which slowed things down, and agencies like the CDC backtracked on some of their approvals. So there's a lot of complications in the actual implementation, again, as I mentioned, but it's something where generally OPM is saying that agencies have the discretion to allow those reasonable accommodations. They should be granted on a case-by-case basis, while at the same time emphasizing that those should be used sparingly and that telework should really just be not a very common practice for federal employees.
Do you think now that the guidance is out, that will help agencies who were in that sort of reconsideration of reasonable accommodation?
It's possible. I think we may see more clarifications from OPM over time, but it's, in the way things are operating right now, some federal employees who have struggled with this may be able to go back to the guidance to look for more details or more ways to work with their agency on that. But, it's unclear with this guidance being so recent how it's going to look in practice and how much it's really going to change things. It seems to be more of a reflection of what was already in place rather than something that is truly changed for federal employees.
Got it. The return to office executive order was one that came out very early in the Trump administration. Do they have data now about what in-office rates are like?
There was a recent blog post from OPM Director Scott Cooper where he reported that around 90% of federal employees were working on-site full-time. And that number is an increase from what we saw during the Biden administration. The numbers and the way those things are measured is a little bit unclear. You can look at, timesheets, but there's always been this question of how accurate that data is for how federal employees are teleworking, and agencies measure things differently. But generally, there, of course, has been an increase in on-site presence since the Trump administration began. With that 90%, as Director Cooper reported, that leaves about 10% of federal employees who would have then been given an exemption from those on-site requirements, been able to telework or work remotely. And again, going back to those couple of reasons where it's due to a disability or some other really compelling reason that an agency can approve. But again, generally, it's going to be very much in the office presence right now.
Drew, the argument between being on site in the office and being able to work hybrid has kind of been a football for years, even before COVID. What is the Trump administration's argument in favor of bringing everyone back into the office?
Some of the things, going back again to Director Cooper's recent blog post, he talks about how workplace culture suffers when people aren't in the office. There's not as clear communication or collaboration. He talked about how strong connections are formed with in-person presence, and especially for maybe those who are new hires or just starting their federal careers, they might need more on-site presence for training, for mentoring, things like that. And just the fact that connections are harder to build virtually. Those are sort of the arguments that have been made in favor of on-site work. Over time, there have been a little bit stronger criticisms as well of telework, where you've had, for example, House Republicans saying that they believe federal employees who were working from home are not working. That's obviously been pushed back against very strongly by federal employees themselves and a lot of supporters of the federal workforce who say there are very clear monitoring mechanisms to be able to tell that federal employees are indeed working from home, and many do say that they are more productive working from home as well.
So what is the flip side of the argument then at this stage for proponents of hybrid work?
Right. Well, the one that I mentioned, of course, is that productivity and performance are better when there is that flexibility in employees' schedules. They say that they feel like there's fewer distractions at home and that they're able to focus on their work without having the commute time. They say that they're able to put in sometimes longer hours and work more effectively that way. Others, look more broadly at how this impacts the federal workforce as a whole and say that it really helps with recruitment and retention and can be a driving force for someone to take a job if they see that there's going to be some flexibility in that regard. They also say there's not really necessarily a decrease in collaboration or connection because there are so many ways to connect virtually as well. So as you mentioned, this is something that's gone back and forth for many, many years. The arguments for and against the COVID-19 pandemic obviously heightened that argument. And, I think now we're in another new phase of what that work really looks like. But at least for the time being, it seems like end of the day, federal employees are expected to just simply be in person almost entirely.
Drew, one of the other big initiatives from the Trump administration was the downsizing of the federal building footprint. And a lot of folks have argued that hybrid work or remote work is one way to make that more possible. How is the administration connecting those two dots, or are they?
It seems like they are connecting those two dots. They're trying to look at both scaling that down while also returning people to the office. It's a little bit unclear on how that kind of matches up with those two mindsets. But certainly if you look at GSA, the General Services Administration, that's something they have tried to do to reduce office space. But, on the flip side, especially when we first heard about the return to office last year, a lot of federal employees were saying that things were just way too packed. There were conference rooms full of people. They were out of office supplies a lot of the time. So it's definitely been a bit of a stretch and a bit of a challenge, absolutely, for federal employees who have been told to come back to work full time.
So does it feel like now that this policy is out, that that's the end of the argument for the Trump administration? We're not revisiting it. Here's the rule.
It seems to be the case, at least for the rest of this administration. Return to office has not really come into question as much as it has in past years when there was more openness to hybrid work. So now it seems like moving forward, at least for the next couple of years, federal employees should just be expected to work in the office, again, unless they have some sort of exemption, which agencies are supposed to be approving as needed.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for bringing us the clarity on this important issue.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find our full story at federalnewsnetwork.com.